The OCD and Anxiety Podcast by Robert James Coaching. Hello and welcome to the OCD and Anxiety Podcast, where we explore how to have a more positive relationship with anxiety disorders, taking back control so that you can start living the life you choose and not the one chosen by your fears. Hello and welcome to episode 413. I hope that you're doing very well today, wherever you are. And if you are struggling with OCD or anxiety and you would like to get some support with that, well, you can by heading over to my website, robertjamescoaching.com. There you can book in for a free session with me, or if you prefer, you can send me a message and let me know about what you're struggling with. In today's podcast, I'm going to be talking about what to do with OCD when the inevitable ups and downs of life strike. How do we keep ourselves in the best possible position to be able to deal with OCD, despite the fact that we might be going through difficult and emotional times in our life? And this is a really important part of the process of managing OCD in the long term. If you do enjoy this podcast, as you may have heard me said before, it would be amazing if you could subscribe. It really does help the podcast to grow. So if you wouldn't mind subscribing, I would really appreciate that. And yeah, I really hope that you enjoy. If you have any questions at all about anything I speak about today, do please let me know. And off we go. As always, here's a quote to get us started today, and it's by somebody called Michael Lee Chin. Life is not linear. You have ups and downs. It's how you deal with the troughs that defines you. And this is a fantastic quote because it really kind of sums up what we have to do with OCD. When you're really on top of your game, when you're feeling really good, when you're riding high, OCD tends to take, for a lot of people, not everybody, but for a lot of people, it tends to take a bit more of a back seat. You know, you may have experienced this with OCD where you maybe just be doing a bit better. You might have a day where out of nowhere, you're just feeling a little bit lighter, that the obsessions are easier to deal with and you're able to manage it a bit more. But the problem is, as we know with life isn't smooth. Progress is not linear. Difficulties and challenges tend to appear. Sometimes negative things or challenging things can happen to us, and we have to find a way to navigate that. And, you know, when you're struggling with OCD on top of those kinds of things that can happen, well, you know, unfortunately, when we go through an emotional event, challenge that really causes us to have a lot more anxiety, to perhaps doubt ourselves more, to struggle with other difficult emotions other than anxiety, then of course the OCD becomes more difficult to manage. And we can convince ourselves in those moments that we don't have what it takes, that even if we've been working on the OCD and perhaps we've made lots and lots of progress, unfortunately, in these kinds of moments, if you're not careful, you know, you can kind of catastrophize. You know, when we are going through an emotional time for whatever reason, and it may not actually be that something's happened. Sometimes, you know, nothing has actually changed outwardly in our lives. You know, everything is pretty much the same as normal, you know, but for some reason we are much more emotional. We are struggling more with anxiety. We're feeling more vulnerable. And again, this is a normal part of life. This is a normal part of being a person. We all have these kind of, waves of different emotional states. And, you know, we kind of want that. We wouldn't want to be, you know, on the same level all the time. If we were just on that same emotional plane all the time and just the same all the time, obviously that would get quite boring. And so the change in emotion is necessary. It's a part of life. But of course, with OCD, what can happen is when we do go through a more emotional moment, be that just because that's a normal rhythm of things, or be that because actually there's something very difficult going on in your life. It's very, very important in these moments of challenge that we manage ourselves, that we recognize that, in these moments, it's much, much harder to deal with the OCD. That's the first thing that we have to kind of do in a way, is we do have to recognize that, almost hold up our hands and say, right now in this moment, these things are going on, or nothing's going on, but I'm feeling much more vulnerable. I'm feeling much more emotional. I'm noticing that my mind wants to catastrophize about things. And I think that word catastrophize, it really sums up what I'm talking about here. When we are in these more emotional moments, these more vulnerable moments, the temptation to catastrophize can be huge. We can easily persuade ourselves that, all of these difficult emotions are evidence that despite the progress that we believed we were making with OCD, that in fact, no, that wasn't progress at all, that we've gone back to square one. We've really been kind of tricking ourselves into believing that we'd made progress, that we haven't made progress at all, that everything's bad, and OCD is going to come back and it's going to ruin everything again. And the reality is, when you're in these emotional states, it's much, much easier to start believing this stuff, to actually take it at face value, and to think that it actually has some relevance and truth to it. Whereas a lot of the time it doesn't. It's literally just a normal pattern of emotions that for some reason you're going through a more emotional and challenging moment, and that just makes the thoughts and the obsessions seem a lot more threatening, a lot more difficult to deal with. Or there is something that is very challenging going on in your life, and that just means that you're more vulnerable too. And so, whatever difficult thoughts might pop up in that moment, again, it's going to be much more tempting and easier for us to start getting involved with them, to start trying to push them away and fight with them, do all the stuff that we know we shouldn't do, but we kind of feel like we have to do it in order to make ourselves feel okay. Of course, we don't have to do it, but that's the trick of the OCD. And, in these moments, it's very easy to fall back into the OCD trap. What is the OCD trap? Well, we know what that is. If you listen to this podcast on a regular basis, you know that OCD trap is all about us looking for that certainty again, demanding that, that we have to know what's going on. We have to figure out why we're having these difficult emotions. We need to get to the bottom of them, and we start kind of getting caught up in the thoughts again and start trying to figure them out again and have more certainty about them. Inadvertently, of course, all that is doing is getting us more and more stuck. Every time that we try to figure these things out, or that we perform more compulsions, of course, all that is actually doing is just going a little bit deeper down into the OCD rabbit hole. And the deeper down we go into that, well, the harder it is then to get ourselves back out again. And that's the frustrating thing about the OCD trap. Really, with OCD, what we've got to learn to do is, as soon as possible, is to recognize it and to nip it in the bud. The sooner that we're able to let go of the compulsions, to stop demanding the certainty, and to just allow a little bit of that emotional discomfort to just be present, then we begin to kind of move past that initial challenge, and we find ourselves able to actually deal with the OCD again. But as soon as we get back into pushing it away and fighting with it, the opposite happens. And so it's really just about recognizing this process, and recognizing in yourself that you are going to have these more challenging moments. There are going to be times where difficult things happen, or, that there isn't going to be difficult things happening, but for whatever reason, you are just feeling more prone to listening to your thoughts. And if in those moments you indulge those thoughts and you start kind of falling back into old patterns and old habits, unfortunately, it's very likely that you're going to get yourself stuck again. And I think a really important thing here to talk about is habits. And really the best way to, I think, help yourself to avoid this kind of pitfall of when you're having these difficult moments, to kind of not get too lost in that OCD rabbit hole, is really to recognize that your habits will stop you from kind of going down so deeply into the rabbit hole. The more that you have supporting positive habits, the more likely it is that you're going to, almost like a trampoline, you're going to go down, but you're going to spring back up. You're going to find a way to get yourself back to where you want to be, and a bit quicker. And, it's really our habits. We fall as low as our habits will allow us to. And so when you have things in place like exercise, for example, or you've been practicing on a regular basis, leaning into your own discomfort, you've been meditating, you've been learning how to feel difficult emotions, you've been perhaps doing wellness strategies that help you to generally feel better. Maybe you've even been exploring cold showers, for example. All of these things can be helpful in their way. But when you have habits like this, it really supports you when you have these difficult moments to come back out of it again and to find a way through it. And that's really what it's all about. The more that you can work on building habits that support you, I think it really does help in these difficult moments to just find a way through it. And, if we don't get caught up in the ruminations, if we don't get caught up in the compulsions, well, often, the emotional moment begins to pass. The challenge that life presents begins to resolve itself in some way, and we're able to start finding our way a bit better again. So really kind of trying to think about what those habits are for you. What are some things that you do already that help? Can you make sure that you keep up with those things? And are there new things that you could add in that generally really help you to feel a bit better, that will help you to manage OCD when these more difficult moments, which are inevitable at times, come in? So there we go, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed that one. If you have any questions at all about anything I've spoken about today, do please let me know. And also, please do subscribe. It really does help the podcast. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, that would be amazing. Many thanks, and see you next time. Just a quick reminder that if you want to get a free session, all you need to do to get that is to head over to my website, www.robertjamescoaching.com. And there you can leave me a message and we can arrange the free session. And now just a quick reminder of my disclaimer. Any information that you view on my website, Instagram page, Facebook group, or anywhere else online, or any information that you listen to on the podcast, is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for actual medical or mental health advice from a doctor, psychologist, or any other medical or mental health professional.